Let's see.
First of all, thank you for that very kind introduction. The reason why I didn't want him to read like my bio and all of the stuff that I'm in is because I'm doing a bit here, and he takes like 5 minutes of my time. So as you can tell, I'm Jorge Chapa, as mentioned. I'm the Chief Impact Officer, and as you can tell by my name and accent, obviously from the Green Building Council of Australia. If you've heard me say that joke before, I apologize, but also like it's a green conference, so we're reusing them. I'm trying to wake you all up. I've been in Australia now for 20 odd years, so I'm obviously call it home very kindly, and I've been working at the Green Building Council of Australia for about 17. I do, as was mentioned, I do sit on several committees, international. Some of them are meaningful and important for you to be aware of. For instance, GRESS, which Lisa mentioned, climate bonds, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, we work with them on the low-carbon building standard. And that's all fine. But the most important thing that you should know about me is if you ever send me an email, and I happen to be out of office, you'll get back a Mexican recipe. That's very, very important. So keep that in mind. If you ever find out I'm away, just email me. I'm going to be talking to you about our experience with Green Star buildings. So first of all, we're very excited and extremely overjoyed, I'd say, by all of the incredible work that Brad, Sam, Andrew, and the team at the New Zealand Green Building Council have done to adapt Green Star buildings into New Zealand. Not only have they taken the rating tool and make it work for this country, somehow they've improved it, to which the only answer we had was, you bastards. But I'm hoping we're not recording this. So they've actually made it better, which has been fantastic. So they've learned from everything that we have learned since its release in 2020. So 4 years ago, everything we learned, we passed on to them, and they've improved, cleaned up, and generally made it significantly better. And we're taking it all back, so we're doing a small revision to our version from everything that we've learned from them and from our partners in South Africa. So some of you may not know that Green Star is also used in the African continent. So they asked me, and they said, can you come over and make a lot of jokes and also talk about your experience with Green Star buildings? And the first thing they said was, we want you to be able to tell us the story of why you decided to make such a gigantic change. Because it is a change, right? It is a radical revision to the rating tool. And I wanted to tell you a little bit of that story. I wanted to tell you a little bit of the story of then what happened when we were doing the consultation process for Green Star buildings, how industry reacted, what their fears and challenges and things that they were worried about were, and what's happened since, right? Because we've had it running for about almost 4 years. I want you to cast your mind back to a decade ago. We had just released Green Star Design As-Built, 2014, give or take, and the end of 2014. And if you cast your mind back then, this was 10 years ago, that hadn't happened. That's COP21 in Paris, 2015. Right? So we launched the rating tool. No one had heard of the Paris Agreement. We didn't really have a lot of understanding of where we were headed in terms of climate change story or anything else. In fact, that same year, the UN Sustainable Development Goals were all agreed to. They did not exist a decade ago. That's a short 10 years ago. And I'm going to skip a few slides because as I was practicing the presentation, I was like, oh, I should do it the other way around. So just bear with me. It's very exciting. We'll get back to them. In fact, if you look at this slide shows drivers and influences and a series of frameworks that did not exist at all 10 years ago. And think about how much of these frameworks rule our lives now. Right? TCFD, we've spoken about climate reporting. We've spoken about Science-Based Targets Initiative. There was barely anyone doing anything on SBTI on property at the time. The IPCC report, the infamous report that said, hey, 2 degrees is nice, Joel, but we really should go to 1.5 degree, was released only a short 6 years ago, right? Did not exist then. The taxonomy of sustainable finance. We spent time today talking about sustainable finance. None of that thing existed. And even right now, like literally this year, we have the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures. just this past year, we've started really taking biodiversity seriously as a measure of financial concern. So, well, now we go back. Let's do that. So why did we go through and did the revision, right? So we didn't know. Obviously, we're not wizards. We were looking at doing, we released Green Star Design as-built version 1, and as soon as we release a version of Green Star, we start planning like what could potentially be the thing that happens next time. There's a team that runs the maintenance and the development of the tools, and there's another team that starts looking at what are the strategic areas that we want to increase for Green Star. So when we started looking at what would a Green Star version 2 look like, we thought, Green Star Design as-built version 2 look like, we thought to ourselves, what if we simply added a category, resilience category, that was something we thought was going to be important, clean up a couple of credits, and call it a day. And so we started working on that, and we started looking at doing some desktop research. And that was one of the documents that we looked at the time, and next year, the Paris Agreement gets signed, the SDGs get signed, we start seeing all of these things start happening, and we start getting an inkling the world's changing. We look at the World Economic Forum report. Is everyone familiar with the World Economic Forum report? Do you read it? It's a great report. If you want to predict the future, this report helps you understand what's going to happen, unquestionably. They publish this report every year. And so now it's in the 2024 edition, and every year they ask essentially the same questions. What are your risks today? And what do you think the risks are going to be in the future? And if you look at that report over and over again, they'll show you what they are. And you can actually see over time how the long-term risks have becoming more and more about climate, nature and biodiversity, and health, equity, and well-being. Right? And that became the thing for us as we were working on Green Star to say, hang on, we think the things that we're going to ask more, the thing that investors and stakeholders and governments and tenants and so on is going to ask of the built environment is going to look wildly different from the things we've been asking before. We've been asking what is a green building, whereas what we should be asking is, what is a sustainable or a more sustainable building? It looks very different. And it's no longer about how much energy can we save to reduce our costs, but actually how quickly can we get to net zero? And these things kept happening over and over again. These three principles became our overarching principles. And I should say it wasn't just us doing this. We worked with World Green Building Council and the other green building councils worldwide to come up with what we all talk about our strategic imperatives. But what we did was take those imperatives and bring them down and say, this is what Green Star should look like. And we were guessing, right? So we asked ourselves, once we started looking at all of these drivers and influences, we asked ourselves a simple question. It's 2018. What would a building look like in 2025? That was best practice or world leadership. Now, 2025 is next year, right? It's not really far away. It turns out we had to predict what the future could look like in the short term, but it served as a guiding principle. And we set ourselves 5 key goals with the Green Star framework, and we sort of said, hey, okay, what we need to do is redefine what it means to be best practice, redefine what it means to be world leading, redefine what it means to be a sustainable building, like what is Green Star about. No matter what, it has to respond to all of the sustainability megatrends. It cannot just be about energy savings. It has to be about more than that. It has to exceed the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is the least worst thing we can do. So we got to do better than that. And also, really, a lot of the impacts in the built environment are around supply chain. So we have to figure out how to influence the supply chain. So this is the Green Star rating tools essentially how we reform the rating tools or how we're reforming the rating tools. We're talking today about Green Star buildings. In Australia, we do have a Green Star Homes, but obviously here in New Zealand, you have Homestar. So we talk about Green Star buildings, Green Star performance, Green Star communities and Green Star interiors. Performance and communities are getting a second version. They're getting a revision. In Australia, performance version 2 is out. We've been talking to Bobby about how to incorporate some of the learnings from that in New Zealand's version. Communities should be out in a few weeks, months. And fit-outs is next year, right? And so we started looking at that. And one thing we said to ourselves is, if this is a new rating tool, it should all talk to each other. You have a fit-out in a building, in a precinct. There shouldn't be different categories. There shouldn't be different things. And so we came up with what we call the future-focused framework, where essentially the framework itself told you what we're looking for. And so the rating tool itself, the categories themselves, tell you the outcomes that we're looking for. We want healthy, resilient, and positive places for people and nature, built responsibly, and showcasing leadership. Right? Pretty straightforward. That actually sounds like a great place to be in, a great building to be in, or a great city to live in. And that became the goal. That's Green Star, essentially, what we did. And we started looking at it and saying, hey, we have a lot of 5-star rated buildings in Australia. In fact, too many. We need to look at what's going on. Why is the expectation that 5-star is what you should be aiming for? What's wrong? What's going on there? And what we did was to say, hey, we need to redefine what best practice looks like. Best practice really matters. Best practice should be telling you most buildings should be delivered at a best practice level, some should be delivered at a national excellence level, and few, genuinely, should be worthy to be called world leadership. And so we looked at very much where legal compliance was, we looked at what the definition for a good building should be, and then we said, what else would you have to do to get to a 4-star? And a 4-star is an amazing score. And that was a redefinition that we did. We very clearly wanted to tell the market 4-star is where a lot of the buildings should be, and we have to make sure on our side that 4-star complies with the requirements that a market expects of what a best practice is, of what a best practice building is, which is why we have the minimum expectations, and which is why, in our case, we created what we call the climate positive pathway, which in here is the net zero ready pathway. Right? It sets specific requirements that if you follow, you will know you are meeting the expectations of the market for a best practice building. And we wanted to make sure it had to comply with all of the sustainable development goals, right? It had to comply with every financial instrument that we've spoken about. When you look at sustainable finance, we have green bond principles, we have green loan principles, we have social bond principles, sustainability-linked loans, we have a climate transition finance, we have the European sustainable taxonomy, and I'm sure at some point the New Zealand sustainable finance taxonomy and the Australian sustainable finance taxonomy, the Asian finance taxonomy, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Mongolia, Mexico, Chile, US, Canada, and so on. Pick a country. There's essentially right now 32 different definitions of sustainable finance for built environment in the world. And we wanted to make sure that it complied, right? So if you are an investor and you happen to be someone that invests in the European Union or raises money from the European Union, that money, if it goes to a building, has to comply with the sustainable finance taxonomy. And Green Star has to comply with that. Because if you want to have a Green Star project that is compliant with the EU taxonomy so that you can raise that money, it has to meet all of the requirements. And that's what the rating tool does, hence the minimum expectations. We wanted to make sure that it was recognized by the leading standard in terms of green bonds, which is climate bonds. Climate bonds verifies that the bond not only is green, but it's a higher tier of green. Green Star is an automatic compliance path. We worked with them to understand what the requirements that they were going to be adding in, and it complies with it. As Magali said, which by the way, great presentation, Magali, we've all been working on setting out requirements for sustainable finance, right? Neighbors put out their sustainable finance criteria first. We created an Australia-specific version that included Neighbors and a bunch of other rating tools. New Zealand has the new finance guide, and even this past July, we all got together internationally ourselves, the US Green Building Council, BRE, Neighbors, the Singaporean Green Building Council, New Zealand, South Africa, a bunch of us got together and released an international guide that said, if you're trying to draw finance or you're setting out a green bond or a green loan and you're looking to understand what is sustainable, this guide tells you, right? Pretty straightforward. Right, so we go through and we are doing our work on Green Star buildings and we go to consultation and we talk to a lot of people. And the thing that people told us in 2018, 2019 was, you're pushing too hard. Don't do it. We have a requirement in very specific in Green Star buildings in Australia because there is a significant use of gas in buildings, right? So there's about there's about 9 million buildings in Australia, about 6 million of those have a gas connection. Right, so that's a big proportion. We have to electrify buildings. And that's an example, right? They will tell us you cannot require that buildings be fossil fuel free. That's impossible. No one has ever built a building that does not use gas, to which we sort of demonstrated, and we showed them the guidance, and we said, well, we don't think that's going to happen. And they would say, well, we're not going to use Green Star anymore. Over and over, we're not going to use Green Star anymore. And we'll sit down with them and we'd say, but you have a 2030 climate target, and you're saying you're net zero. How are you going to do that if you have gas? Doesn't make sense. They would go back and think about it a little bit more, and then they'll disappear of a little while. And then the year later, they'll be like, all of our buildings are going to be all electric. So that kept happening over and over again. Fun fact. It took Office version 3 and our legacy rating tool, so this was the original version of New Zealand, had all of the multi-sectorial rating tools and so on, 8 years to get to around 400 registrations, give or take. Green Star Design As Built, released in late 2014. Took 6 years to get to about 400 registrations. They told us the rating tool is too hard. It was released in October 2020. By October 2022, we had 490 registrations. It's too hard until you sit down and you realize that the future is asking for this stuff. No question about it. So that was year 2, that was 2022, we're in 2024. Where do we stand? We stand at a very solid and very healthy 559 registrations, and I will make a liar out of myself. That's now 570. When we prepared this slide, that was 559. And we've already started receiving assessments, and I will also make a liar out of myself. We've had about 50 Green Star Buildings assessments already come through. We now have 2 certifications. One of them is this amazing building, which you'll get a great case study on, which is Heritage Lanes, or 80 Ann Street. Mervak will come and tell you all about it. I will not say anything else. But it's a fantastic building. I love this building. First Green Star Building certified project in Queensland. Ask him about the construction process and the decision to switch rating tools at some point. It's a fun story. But they tell us, we asked them, why are you doing this? And they said over and over again, the strategy that Green Star Buildings provides us, the framework that it provides us, the issues that it's tackling, that's what our stakeholders expect. That lines up with our strategy, lines up with our investors. When we speak to banks, lines up with what they want to see. When we talk to tenants, they love this. They think it actually hits the right spots. This is everything they're looking for. Now, the first building that was certified is an office building. Look, if there's one thing Green Star is known for is we certify office buildings, right? Like, that's the thing. So, who wants to guess? Who's brave enough? Actually, let's do all of them. Some of you know, because I've actually been telling people about this. So all of you who know, you're going to have to zip it. But let's say, can I get everyone to stand up? Let's all stand up. It'll be great. So, out of all of the new registrations for Green Star Buildings, you can sit down if you think all of the registrations for Green Star Buildings are office buildings. And if you sit down and you do that statement, I will tell you that right now, don't, right? Would you sit down if you thought 80%, right? 80% of those registrations are Green Star buildings, are office buildings, sorry, office buildings. Would you sit down? No, brave people, good. 70? All right, we got a couple of people who have been sitting down now. Okay, great. 60? Ooh, man. 50? Wow, we have some really brave people here. Okay. 40? Yeah, no cheating, Magali, you know the answer. 30. Okay, the people who are still standing up get a free cup of coffee or tea at the back. Absolutely. The number of registrations are 24 for industrial facilities, 19 for residential buildings, only 18 for offices. Right? 18% of the registrations are offices, 15% are for education, public schools, TAFE, and so on, and the remainder are a smattering of everything else. I will say, and worth acknowledging, in the other section you'll see train stations. We do train stations, railway stations. That's actually a solid 10%. We actually do a lot of railway stations because I've been building a lot of them. It's fantastic. So what sort of projects are registered for Green Star buildings? We have, for example, the powerhouse in Parramatta in New South Wales, brand new museum being built, solar panels on the roof, low embodied carbon steel. They've been working hard to source that, and great roof garden, a lot of amenity. They've had to raise the profile of the site to avoid flooding from climate change. From a weather event, if there's any in the river. We have the social quarter, a shopping center extension and refurbishment. So it already exists. They're adding to it. It's a wonderful shopping center that's being built in Victoria. We have the Central Place, Sydney. If you've ever been to Sydney and you ever go to Central Station, it's a big open area that's full of railways. They're building this development on top, connecting the city that has been divided by those railways into two. And credit to Transport for New South Wales and the development team at Dexus for actually lining up all of or creating some what will hopefully be a great new spaces. Apologies. We'll have Albert Fields, which is a build-to-rent project. I'm going to talk about what is actually my favorite project in a second, which is Yitpi Yatapultiki, right? So this is an Aboriginal learning center in South Australia. It's actually, the name stands for the Soul of Port Adelaide. And it's a First Nations sort of led development. The South Australian government is bringing it forward, creating a cultural regional center. The Kanwa people there and several other of the First Nations groups, they're coming together to build this development. It's a wonderful development, but the thing that's particularly interesting is something that happened to the project team. When they saw, when they were doing the consultation process, we went out there and we spoke to them, and one of the consultants there is a good colleague of ours. And we sort of said, hey, we're going to be taking Green Star, we're going to be building up the climate stuff, the environmental stuff, and we are going to also include a lot of social sustainability stuff. And he came back and essentially, to paraphrase, said, why are you adding all of the social wishy-washy stuff? Right? And understandable. He is a very hardcore engineer. That's what he does. And we explained to him, and he wasn't convinced. And he's like, well, that's what you got to do, but I don't get it. He was one of the people who worked on the project team. And so he tells a story that when he goes and when we started talking to the clients here in this project, they started showing them like all of the sustainability frameworks, and obviously they wanted to make it like environmentally friendly and so on, and so they started showing them the Green Star framework, because I was tied they were interested in learning more about the project. And he goes, the moment we showed them the Green Star framework and healthy, resilient, positive, and we got to the places category, and we got to the people category, we really spent a lot of time talking about it. And then we got to the nature category, and we spent a lot of time talking about it. And in the resilience category, we talk a lot about community resilience. And so this is this engineer, hardcore engineer, going like, why are we spending so much time on it? Like, we gotta, like, upfront carbon, right? Like, clean air, energy efficiency, what are we talking about? Like, we want to put solar panels on this stuff. And he keeps listening, and he keeps going, and they're spending all of this time on these credits and placemaking and talking about how it needs to link with the land and how it needs to respect waterways and so on and so forth. And eventually, they finish the conversation, and then they go, great, well, that's what we're going to do. We should make it energy efficient and upfront carbon, but really we want like a timber building, natural elements, and all this stuff. And then he goes, and then he realizes, out of that, he goes, oh wait, they've just given me permission to make like the most efficient building I can do. They've just given me permission to use all of the right techniques that I know of to make a building that is light on the land. So now he will say over and over again, this building, because of that engagement and those social aspects of the rating tool includes, allows the community to get to a consensus that this building should be the lightest, most environmentally friendly building that I've ever worked in my life. right? And he was able to see the value of the social aspects of sustainability to create something that is genuinely going to be a wonderful development when it's finished. So what's the closing thoughts? I got like 30 seconds and no more jokes. I do want to encourage you all to take a look at the rating tool. We've been very successful in Australia at getting adoption on it. Essentially, you haven't been able to register for any other rating tool for a bit, but even then, people are excited. People are using it over and over again. 500 projects in essentially 3 short years wildly exceeds our expectation. Projects of any type, any size, and any complexity we've been able to manage. So I'd like to encourage you all to take a look at Green Star Buildings. But really, what I want you to take a look at completely is the opportunity that Green Star Buildings brings to you to speak to multiple stakeholders, to be able to align with your strategy, and to be able to explain to people that what we really want to achieve, healthy, resilient, and positive places for people and nature, is actually achievable, right? And the rating tool gives you an opportunity to get there. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jorge. Just got a question for you.
Sure.
Okay. So kia ora, Jorge, for your talk. I'm particularly inspired by all the stories and the projects you've shared at the end. That was really cool. I honestly thought that almost all Green Star buildings were commercial offices, but how wrong was I? 18%.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and it's held. It's been obviously coming down over time.
Yeah.
And it's held, and look, it's a bit of a trick question because I also kind of forget that we all blurred the fact that no one's going to offices these days, and no one's building offices, but somehow people still think that it's 70% or 80%.
And lastly, I think I found really interesting was that that risk matrix, that assessment that you guys did, how everything in the long term all converges against, climate change, biodiversity, and well-being, isn't it? So it makes a lot of sense. My question for you, bro, is say I'm an architect, I'm a designer, I care about sustainability, I'm pretty new to the framework. Like, how do I navigate this landscape of certifications so that I can maximize my fit-out project?
Well, I mean, I can tell you what I would do in Australia, but which is, of course, come and speak to us. But realistically speaking, the same applies here. Go and talk to the New Zealand Green Building Council. They run these courses to help you understand what it is that you have to do. There is great material that we've developed for Green Star Buildings that will be very helpful to translate what is essentially still a complex guidelines into more easily digestible material. Nice. And of course, events like this is how you learn about the stuff that's happening. So that's what I would recommend. Definitely approach New Zealand Green Building Council. They will give you all of the information you need.
Tēnā koe. Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. Not a problem. Thank you very much.